I'm John Buchanan. Now, as you know, I'm a big fan of Sample Alchemy, and we've looked at Sample Alchemy a couple of times on the channel, and indeed within live streams as well. That was brave, wasn't it? What we're going to do today is to take our knowledge and understanding of Sample Alchemy a little bit deeper by looking at all of its modulation possibilities, as well as beginning to understand how we can bring internal motion to sound sources within Sample Alchemy, all of which is going to massively extend the kind of, I don't know, the sound shaping possibilities of this absolutely amazing sort of sampler. I really do think it's an unsung hero of the lineup of options from a sound making perspective within Logic. And I think part of that is because people don't understand it. So let's keep lifting the lid on its extraordinariness. What I've done is to find this little sound called Abstract Harp's Pattern 02. It sounds like this. That's quite enough of that. Now, in order to get this into Sample Alchemy, what we need to do is to simply just drag and drop it directly into that sampler. And I can do that directly from the browser. I'm going to just grab it, and instead of just dragging it on a track here, which would set up an audio track for it, I'm going to keep dragging it left until I choose where I'm going to create a new track for it, and it's Sample Alchemy that I'm interested in. Now, the reason why I've selected this sound is because I like all of the separate little pitches that exist within it. We can see those represented here as this audio waveform, and straight away what we're in a position to do within Sample Alchemy is to go and find the bits of that we like. Now, by default, like most samplers, when you drag and drop a sound, we're going to be in what's called classic mode. And what that means is that if I choose to audition this sound by pressing A, I can either play it on my keyboard, or I can press A, which is immediately going to trigger playback of it. We're going to hear that sample is just going to play through. Now, at the moment, we're hearing a kind of, well, firstly, it's changed key because the trigger key is different from the original playback key. That's fine, doesn't matter in the least. But also what we're hearing are the kind of artifacts that come from the type of sampler into which you drag and drop this sound. And by default, what we're doing at the moment is we're using granular. But what I'm actually going to do within this video is to switch across to additive. And this is a different type of resampling approach, and it's going to sound slightly different. There's a kind of more crystalline quality to it, which I think is going to work appropriately for this sound. But I'm not interested in classic mode. What I want to do is to simply just find a note which we can sort of cycle around as we have before within Sample Alchemy. And so what I'm going to do is to choose scrub mode. And by default, what this is going to do is to simply just scrub over a particular area of the waveform. And if scrub feels too pointy, too specific, what we could do would be to switch to bow mode instead, which you can do something similar, but it's just going to cycle across a slightly larger area of the waveform. And I do like that, but actually I want this note to be a note. So for this one, I'm going to come back to scrub, and actually we'll just see where we get to with this particular thing. Okay, so far, everything we've looked at so far. The only thing, in fact, if you've watched the previous Sample Alchemy videos that I've made that's new, is that we're in additive mode. But this video is all about the idea of creating modulation, change, further evolution of sounds. Okay, so how do I begin to think about applying modulation to a sound like this? What might I modulate? Well, like most things in Logic, the answer is almost everything you can see down here. So what I'm going to do is to come to the mod matrix, which is here, and we're going to begin to understand exactly what's possible here and how we can set up assignments. So let's suppose what I wanted to do was to create some pitch variation to this particular playback engine, this A playback engine. Well, the pitch variation knob is here. So if I was to click on it, what will immediately happen is that the target has been specified by me clicking on that particular parameter. What I now have is the opportunity to target that particular variable. And then what I can do is to choose what I want to have target it and select the depth for it. And the way that I can do that is here. So what I'm going to do is firstly turn on this modulation assignment. And then what I'm going to do is to say, okay, well, what do I actually want to have do that? So for a moment, what I'm going to do is I'm going to set up my modulation wheel, which is right here on my keyboard in front of me. And I'm going to use the mod wheel to control the amount of this pitch variation. What I'm then going to do is to set the range for that here. Now you can see that the moment you create an assignment like this, a new little orange surround will appear, which is showing you the potential range of that modulation. And because it's set to 100%, what that means is I've got full pitch variation. If I push my mod wheel all the way up to the top, I'm going to get the maximum amount of pitch variation, and all the way down at the bottom, it's going to be the minimum. If I want to limit that range, what I can do is to just drop it down, and you can see here that this little orange surround is getting smaller. I wonder if I can actually make Sample Alchemy a bit bigger. Ha 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 ha. Okay, that's going to be a little bit clearer to see. Okay, so we can see that is changing as I amend the amount of that. And of course, because it's the mod wheel, what that means is that to start with, we're not going to hear any, and then I'll push this little mod wheel here, this little assignment, and we should see that happen. Woozy is a word that I would use. So we've now got our first little assignment. Okay, so that's fine. Now I've picked that one on purpose because it's really easy for us to hear. How could we swap that assignment for something else? Well, if I wanted to change it for, let's say, I don't know, one of the envelopes, for instance, I could do that instead. Now there are two envelopes within Sample Alchemy, one of which we've seen already in previous videos, and that is the amp envelope, which is up here. And by default, when you first open it, you're looking at the amp envelope settings. They aren't shown as sliders or rotaries, they're just listed as numbers. So here is my attack time, decay, sustain, and release. But what I can also do is to toggle the amp envelope across to a mod envelope. So by simply clicking that button, here we now have a second envelope used for modulations. So if what I wanted to do is to say, actually, you know what, for a moment, I'm going to suspend the mod wheel doing anything. And instead, what I'm going to do is to choose that same target currently selected here. And what I'm going to do is to choose the mod envelope. Now what we're going to find is that these settings will change the behavior of the way that the pitch variant starts. So if I was to increase the takt time significantly, let's take it up to, I don't know, 5 seconds or so, and then we were to have some decay on it as well, drop sustain to 50%, and then have a longer release time, what we're going to discover is that when I play a note, it's going to take a while, about 5.5 seconds, to get all the way up to the top. It's then going to drop away. Have I managed to make that 14.91 seconds? That's too long. Let's not do that. We'll also have that drop away over 5 seconds. It's then going to reach a sustain level of around the middle. And then when I let go of it, it's going to release back to its current position. I let go. Why did I let go? And then we let go of it. Now, of course, you can see it releasing. The reason we don't hear that is because I'm willing to bet in the amp envelope, there is no release time, so we don't actually get to hear that fade out. Okay, so if you want the sound of loads of kind of digital crying cats, that's how you produce it, by using your mod envelope to modulate the pitch variation. Okay, so it goes without saying that actually this parameter, whilst it's useful from the perspective of demonstrating what's possible, it's not necessarily the most beautiful sounding thing. Let's find something else that we're going to target. Now, in order to do that, all I'm going to do is to click on a different parameter. I'm going to come back to the symmetry option. And straight away, what I can see is that there is already some variation being added to this sound, which is coming in and producing this change. And waveform wise axis is the one that's doing that. In other words, the position here is the one that's being modulated. So when I press a note, I'm in a position to bring in some of that change or to change the symmetry setting simply by moving the position for source A up and down. But what if I wanted to control that in a different way? Well, we already know what we might do here. I'm going to just turn that off for a second so we can assign a different one. And this time we're going to look at some of the other options. So waveform, I already know about. That's literally the position on the axis up and down. We know about velocity. If I hit notes harder, they will affect whatever I target more significantly. Key follow is all about where I play on my keyboard. So high notes will open up a parameter, low notes will keep it towards its lower end. Aftertouch, if your keyboard, or you want to program this after the fact in post-production, if your keyboard has aftertouch, in other words, you play a note and then you can squeeze further, aftertouch can be used to change any parameter you like. We know all about pitch bend and we've already seen the mod wheel. We also know that we could use the amp envelope. That's probably not a great idea because that's usually used to control volume, but we can use it to control other things too if we want. And we've seen what the mod envelope does. And then we also have the opportunity to use LFOs. And rather than having a dedicated LFO page where we can choose waveforms and shapes, all of that is fixed within Sample Alchemy. It'd be nice over time to see that change so that actually Sample Alchemy gives us more LFO control. But what we've got is a sine wave, either clocked to 1 bar, half a bar, a quarter note beat, an eighth note beat, or a 16th note. So if I wanted really rapid movement, I could select the 16th note LFO sine wave. And what I could then do would be to say, yeah, you know what, I want that to be controlling the symmetry amount 100%. And now suddenly we have a huge 80s super synth. So that's the LFO amount. And of course, if I choose a different speed, what we're going to discover is that we get the same effect, but much more under control. So we're hearing that even more clearly. And what we've also got is a kind of random LFO. So a little bit of random glide. And again, what that does is to, as its name suggests, sort of choose a value for us. So it's dancing around and going wherever it wants to. Quite nice if you like kind of slowly evolving sorts of sounds. And we're going to get there with this too. So the ones that I've jumped over, a couple of separate little options here, which are interesting too. So we've got three. One's called held, one's called flip-flop, and one is called random. More random. We love random. Let's start with held though. What this does is this. So you can hear that when I hold down a note, what it does is it opens up across the range of whatever it is that I've done. And the moment I let go of it, it stops. So it effectively gives us a chance to add emphasis to any parameters we like for as long as notes are held. Hence its name. Flip-flop does also what you might expect. What's going to happen now, let me just increase the range a little bit, is it's going to jump from one side of the modulation range to the other. So every time I play a new note, it's going to just simply jump, which is really nice because it means that we have an opportunity to do things like make a sound pan from side to side. You can imagine that if what I wanted to do is to have each note of the pattern that I programmed change side, then of course I could select flip-flop, set up a big range, but of course I'd have pre-chosen pan as the source that I wanted to do that to. I'd simply click here and then I'd select those parameters here. Let's come back to symmetry for a moment and we'll see the next one, which of course is random, which I think you know what this is going to do. Every time I play a note, it's going to choose a different location. So it's dancing around and going wherever it wants to. Really great if what you want is this kind of super sequenced sort of sound and it's doing something a little bit more under control, which I think will be nicer if I put on the filter here for a moment and we just take out some of the top end. Okay, and now we've got something which has got the potential to be a bit more sequenced. That'd be really nice, in fact, with Logic's arpeggiator, choosing a different value for every single step. Okay, so there's the mod matrix. As I say, choose a parameter by clicking on it first, and then you've got up to 4 things that can control every single parameter. Okay, we're in good shape there. Interrupting is a filthy habit, and I'm doing it yet again. I'm going to try and make this one the briefest one yet, I promise. Head to learn.johnnybuchananmusic.com if you want even more of this kind of stuff. Deeper dives, but also sounds, and if you sign up via the newsletter, the opportunity to be part of a community where questions get asked, I can answer them, we can all get involved in getting better at music making. So if you want extra, that's the place to go. Extra sounds, as I say, extra courses, extra. So let's come out of the mod matrix for a second and think about other ways in which we could introduce movement. But actually, just before we do that, let's get a couple more sound sources into this sound. So at the moment, we are using sound source A by itself. What I want to do is to find some others. I'm going to turn on B, C, and D. All of these are also going to be additive. And what I want to do, in fact, let's do this sequentially. So we know the first one. I think that's going to be nice. Let's add a third. Yep, okay, that's fine. And then what we'll do is find a final one too. And what I'm going to do is go for this slightly more overtony thing. Let's bring all of them in for a second and play a note. Remember, this is now going to trigger all of these sources. And what I'm going to do is slightly soften the attack time, something a bit more pad-like, and introduce some release time as well. Slightly organy quality. Remember, what we can also do is to open up the mixer by pressing the mixer button and create a volume balance, which I think is going to be a little bit more interesting. So this kind of hyper overtony thing we've got at the end, I can turn the volume of that down. And what we could do would be to prioritize a couple of these individual sort of moments in the middle. By the way, by clicking on an individual layer here, these can also be modulated. So if what I wanted to do is to say, okay, the volume of, let's say, layer B, I would like to modulate in and out of the mix, I could do that, let's say, using an LFO. So if I decided that I wanted the LFO over a bar to control the volume of this second layer, let's set a depth of about 80%. When I play that note, we'll see that movement applied. And so now we've got a little bit of extra movement into the sound as well. So not only have we got individual parameters per layer, we've also got the option for the individual layer volume balances to also be modulated. Okay, what I'm going to do is to close the mixer down for a second, and we are going to come back to bow mode. And what that's going to introduce is a little bit of movement around the sound sources. So rather than just being fixed as they are with scrub, we're just going to start to get a little bit of extra stuff now. But of course, we've retained those other assignments, and that's nice. Now, just before I move on to the next thing, which is I'm going to show you how we can introduce even more motion into this sound, the other thing to get your head around is the way that filtering works within Sample Alchemy. So by default, to keep things nice and simple, what we have is a global filter, which means that at the moment, every single one of these sound sources is passing through one filter, and the cutoff dial is controlling the tonal shaping for all of them together. And that's fine, and it's nice. But if I want an individual filter for every single sound source, I can have one of those instead. I can turn off the global button, and then what I've now got a chance to do is to see the filter for each individual layer. So at the moment, I'm looking at the filter for option C, but playback engine C, but for it to do something, I need to turn its power light on. And now what I've got is that filter switched on for just that individual layer. If I want to do the same thing for B, I click on B, and then I'm in a position to choose its filtering. So what that means is, again, if I wanted to get rid of some of the fizz in the D layer here, I could click on it, turn on its filter, and just slightly rein in how much top end there is in that sound. And that's really nice. Okay, now then, I mentioned motion. Now, in order to really understand how this works, what I'm going to do is to come back to just layer B. I'm choosing B at random. It doesn't need to be B for you. You can choose any one you like. And what we have a chance to do here is to come to the motion option. Now, what this really does is it allows me to draw automated movement of an individual playback engine's point and then to loop or sequence that movement. So the way that this works is that provided I've got this little record light flashing, the moment I click on this, what's going to happen is we're going to begin to see that the movement is going to be recorded. And when we've finished, we can see exactly what we can do with that. So what I'm going to do is to press B and I'm going to drag it around, and then we'll begin to see what happens with that. So when I click on it, you'll see that the record light will go bright red, and we'll see that the little playback head of that motion is going to begin to move as well. And when I'm done, I can press stop. Now, what that's done is to capture some of the movement that I've just put in. But at the moment, it's this completely random duration. I've got sort of 21 beats worth of that. And I don't want that. What I want is to create a loop around this particular region. And what I want to do is to have the duration of that be 8 long. In other words, what I want is 8 beats of that loop. I want it to start at the beginning of bar 1, and I want it therefore to end at the beginning of bar 9, which I'm going to just put in there. So I've got an absolutely fixed 8-bar duration loop. Now again, if I wanted to, I'm going to have 4 bars of it. I can just put in 4, and then what I can do is to make sure that the loop end is at bar 5. In fact, that's automatically done that calculation for me. And what that now means, if I come back to the play engine, is that if we play a note, we're going to see the outline of that movement that I've just recorded baked into the behavior of playback module B. Which is really beautiful. And if we bring in the other layers as well, we'll hear that in the context of the whole mix. So we've now seen what modulation possibilities there are within Sample Alchemy. We've got the mod matrix over on the right-hand side, but we've also got this motion tab, or motion tab. I just put an umlaut on the O, which is a nice way of adding a little bit of extra flavor. And we've seen that what that can do is to introduce this kind of automated looped movement. Now, what I have done is to spend a little bit longer playing with this sound, because there was some stuff about it that felt a bit spiky, but also I didn't really feel like I properly captured the motion the way that I wanted to. So what I now have is a variation of exactly the same sound. This is still the abstract harps pattern. It's exactly the same source material. But what I've done is to spend a few minutes, I might be slightly lying about that, it's a bit longer than that, just curating this a little bit more and thinking about how I can sort of nurture the sounds a little bit more. And what I'm going to do now is to take you through the version of this sound that I've created, which sounds like this, by the way. Which I really like. Okay, so exactly what is going on here? Well, mostly exactly what we had before. Let me take you through all 4 of the layers individually. So if I turn them all off apart from A, what we're going to discover is that we've got our original sound. which is using the bow algorithm as before, but this time what I have done is to keep the global filter on. So the filter that you can see here is affecting all 4 of these playback engines the same amount. So what we've got is this nice little throbby start. And the only sonic variation that's happening to this particular engine is coming from the fact that the bow is scrubbing across that cycle of waveform. As you can see down at the bottom, there are no modulation assignments for A. So that's nice and simple. What I have done is to record some movement for B, as I did before. So what I've got here now is a shape, once again, that has been automated. And what I've got is some motion that's happening on this, and we'll see the outline of that. Which is really nice. This nice little cyclical sequency thing that's happening with this kind of little offset on this high note that's happening. Now there is some variation here. What we've got is some symmetry movement on this, and that is being controlled from waveform Y. So we're seeing a little bit of that happening. And of course that movement is coming from the fact that I've recorded this in motion. So we're seeing the little offsets to the orange surround for this particular parameter because that's where that movement is coming from. Okay, let's move on. So this is going to be module C. So again, we've obviously got our bow overarching algorithm, which is why we're getting that movement backwards and forwards. But what you can also see is that, again, what I've done is to modulate the symmetry tab. Now, this time I haven't done that with motion. What's happening here is that you can see that symmetry is being affected by a random glide LFO, and that's happening a lot. And I've also got pitch variation, which is coming from the same parameter. So the same random pitch glide is being applied equally to both symmetry and to the pitch variation. And you can hear that wandering around all over the place. Now, that might sound quite weird in the context of just hearing this by itself, but when we add in the other 2 layers that we've also got in this, and because of the way that these sounds are balanced with a sort of setting offset where, because this particular part of the playback engine is kind of between 2 spikes of the waveform and therefore it's a bit quieter, you don't really notice it except that it is providing detail. And that's nice. Okay, what I'm going to do is turn the mixer off, and we'll turn off A, B, and C as well, and come back to module D. And what that sounds like is this. So also a nice little cyclical thing that's happening backwards and forwards, kind of like a clock. And again, it's just over a different part of pitch, a different bit of pitch. And again, if we look at the overall mixer settings, we can see that that module is not very loud. So the whole sound sounds like this. And I think what might be quite nice, because it's that sort of a sound, would be to put it through some reverb. So what I'm going to do is to do that with the yardstick, the Contact Room Simulator yardstick. And what I'm going to do is just open up the top end a little bit. And then what we've got is this kind of really nice cycles-y kind of pattern. And one of the things that's so great about Sample Alchemy is that obviously I'm trying to play everything in time at the moment, but if we deliberately offset the playback of each note of a chord that we play, each playback engine starts with that offset. So we can build up these really interesting interesting cycling patterns, which I think are really nice. Imagine adding some shaping with some effects, maybe adding step effects to this to just accentuate particular moments within it as well. I think it becomes an amazingly powerful playback engine. So what we've got and what we've looked at within this video is the capability for Sample Alchemy's modulation controls to go much further than we've looked at and explored in previous videos. We've seen that the mod matrix is up here. And via this, we're in a position to choose any parameter for any of the playback engines and assign targets and pick sources that are going to control those targets, and we know how to do that. By the way, I've limited myself pretty much to just showing you one individual target and how you might set up one source to control it. But as we've seen, it's definitely possible to add multiple controllers to the same target. That's when all hell can really break loose. And we've also looked at the idea of exploring motion, the idea that what we can do is to record sequences for individual playback engines within Sample Alchemy to produce even more movement. So I think this is just one of the most unsung hero plugins within Logic, and it's my very great pleasure to be kind of lifting the lid on all of its capabilities because I think they are extensive.